talks about how when you go to the doctor's office, if you are made a recommendation on, some type of change to make for your symptoms, asking like, if I was thin, would you still make this recommendation? And just really, yeah.
Welcome to the Empower and Evolve podcast, a space where we will explore topics ranging from mindset to career to business, energetics, spirituality, cyclical living, and beyond. I am your host, Kat and Nat. I am a mindset coach and integrative practitioner on a mission to help you take your life from meh to magical. Without further ado, let's plunge into today's episode. Welcome back, my love. Today I'm joined by Nat from the Fertility Awareness Project, and we're talking all things diet culture in the women's wellness and hormonal health space. Yay, it's super juicy. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Nat. Nat is a double certified fertility awareness educator, menstrual cycle coach, and social worker. As the founder of the Fertility Awareness Project and Fertility Knowledge Collective, Nat has empowered hundreds of people worldwide to chart their menstrual cycles for birth control through the online course Cycle Love. After discovering fertility awareness as a non-hormonal birth control option, Nat was inspired by the magic of body literacy and pursued formal training to help others gain control over their reproductive health. Nat is amazing. I really hope you go and check out her beautiful course. She has got a free series that teaches you on the fertility awareness method basics, which I have in the show links. And her Instagram is full of really great content as well. Nat and I met through the menstrual cycle coach training facilitated by Claire Baker. I took the training and she was the mentor in my pod. Like, I choose to join her pod, and I joined her pod for a reason, because I really loved what she was doing. And I was really curious about FAM, and I was new to it at that point. And I really, really loved having her support as I was learning about these topics, and really just get her insight into what it means to create an online business. Because like we talk about in the podcast, sometimes online business owners don't always love the online space. And yet it's important. So anyway, we're going into lots of juicy topics here. So head on over and listen to this episode now. Welcome to another episode of the Empower and Evolve podcast. Today, I'm joined by Nat. Oh my God, it's going to be so great to have her here. And we're going to talk about diet culture, hormone health, women's health, and just in general, sometimes we get a little carried away with this topic.
Yes. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much. First of all, let's start with, who are you? What do you do? So that the listeners can get to know you and fall in love with you and the work that you do.
Yeah. Well, first I'll start with how we met. So Kat and I met through Claire Baker's cycle coach school. We were in my pod, and it is a program that connects people across all disciplines in integrating menstrual cycle awareness into the work that they do. So I have been in this world of menstrual cycle awareness, fertility awareness for a number of years now. And where my passion really lies is in teaching people to chart their cycles for birth control. I, like many people, was looking for an alternative to hormonal birth control, and just didn't sit right with me to be on the pill. I didn't want to get an IUD because I'm terrified of anything medical, any procedures. So I was looking for an alternative and came across the fertility awareness method. And it was my doctor who suggested that I take a class in person. And it was a Catholic natural family planning class that I took. And it was an hour and a half on a Saturday morning. And I was drinking this bitter coffee from the coffee shop down the road, and my mind was being absolutely blown that I could track ovulation and avoid pregnancy just through charting my cycle, basically. So I kind of went all in with fertility awareness, exploring all the different communities online that exist for FAM, and then decided that I wanted to teach people to do the same thing because I feel like it's one of those things that has a lot of misconceptions around it. It's one of those things that isn't maybe as accessible as hormonal birth control is, but when you learn it and when you really master fertility awareness, it can be a really reliable method of birth control. So I created Fertility Awareness Project to continue to educate people on their menstrual cycle, on ovulation, on fertility. And I've been charting my cycles for probably over 8 years now with FAM. And yeah, that's kind of how I got to where I am now. Yeah.
I love that. And I don't know if I've ever even told you this, but when I started cycle coach training and we were looking at all the different pods, I was like, I definitely want to be in Nat's pod. Like, I love everything you do. I love, like, I had been following you for a little while on social media, and I'm super, like, I use FAM myself as well. I have probably now for, oh, how long has it been? Like 2 or 3 years? Like charting my cycle and tracking ovulation and all the things for birth control reasons. And I really loved the approach you took when it came to teaching FAM and just in general, teaching women on cycles, their bodies. I love your content when it comes to, the whole thing of, oh, like this is when I ovulated after like not ovulating for so long. And it's just so beautiful how you are able to make a topic that can seem a little bit overwhelming so simple and like understandable and really break it down into real life. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's an
Yeah, I
honor
share a
to
lot
be
of,
here.
yeah, well, I feel like I have the best pod ever. I feel like attracts like, and I always love the people in my pod. I'm biased, but um yeah, I feel like I just always get to come across the best people too. And yeah, I definitely try to share real life. And I think as somebody who teaches fertility awareness or yourself, somebody who's in the wellness space, I think there's this expectation that we have perfect menstrual cycles. And I think that's so far from the truth for so many of us. And I think I just try to share reality and share kind of what's actually going on in my cycles, even when it's not perfect. And I tend to work with a lot of people who also have imperfect cycles as well.
I feel like it's often when it comes to the work we do, we find our way here because we've had some kind of a challenge ourselves, right? Like whether it is
Absolutely.
like with the cycles and having irregular cycles and learning to work with that, or whether it's, for me, it's mainly like mindset work, like overcoming these big limiting beliefs and the things that were holding me back. It's we get here for a reason. And even like finding myself in the menstrual cycle awareness space when I was taking the training, I have suffered with so many negative stories around my cycle. I have a terrible IUD story that I don't even want to tell you because of like what you said earlier with medical, like the whole, oh man. Yeah, definitely don't want to share it with you because it would probably like, oh my God, this is so terrifying. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot that we go through as women. Birth control is one of those decisions that I feel like a lot of people are just kind of picking the lesser of two evils, or at least that's what I felt when I was looking for birth control options as well.
yeah, I
Is yeah,
definitely,
a lot of people feel
yeah.
like they're settling, and it's a really hard decision. I have a lot of conversations with people who are weighing different options for birth control, and it's a hard thing to do.
Yeah. And how do you find, like, do you find you get that whole kind of misconception that FAM is hard and it just gets like put into this basket of this is too hard. Let me just take the pill. You find that?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. I think for some people it is burdensome and hard. And I think the reason for that is there is a learning curve.
Mm.
I think one of the reasons why natural cycles is so popular is it's kind of taking a lot of the learning out of fertility awareness and making it really appealing to people who want the benefit of FAM and don't necessarily want to learn. And I think the people who are the most successful with fertility awareness are thoroughly learning it and really understanding it and taking it in. But I also don't think that everybody needs to use FAM. I don't think everybody is a good candidate to use fertility awareness. I think it's really amazing that the information is becoming more widespread and more accessible, but you'll see people really recommending fertility awareness to everybody. Like, go off the pill and start charting your cycle and you'll avoid pregnancy. And I think that is a little bit irresponsible because, yeah, it definitely has a learning curve. And I don't think that everybody needs to use FAM. But at the same time, understanding like ovulation and your fertile window, understanding menstruation is something that everybody should learn. And then from there, make an informed decision of what they want to do for birth control. But I think we're being naive when we're saying like FAM is so simple and so easy. It is when you learn it, but because we're not taught this from a young age, it's not always super intuitive. It does take a little bit of learning. And I think it's important to be realistic about that. I don't think any type of birth control is perfect. I think that really sucks. Like I really wish there was something that was perfect, but there's always going to be drawbacks with every method of birth control. And that's just the reality, you know? But we can learn about how different methods of birth control prevent pregnancy, and we can learn about our cycles and then from there make a decision.
Yeah, very true. I'm curious, who would you say is because you said like it's not for everyone and you don't recommend for everyone. Who would it be that you feel like is really not a great candidate for fertility awareness?
I think that it really depends. I think anybody can learn fertility awareness. I just think that the motivation to learn needs to be there. With fertility awareness, you can't go unprotected all cycle long.
Mm.
So for somebody who puts a lot of weight on that in their birth control decision, FAM might not be the best for them. In the fertile window, when you are potentially able to get pregnant, you will need to use a backup method of birth control, perfect withdrawal or the barrier method, for example. And so that is one of the big drawbacks compared to other methods of birth control. I think everybody can learn FAM, but there is a little period at the beginning where you might not want to go unprotected. Say if you're learning with an instructor for like the first cycle or so, it depends again on the method, but there is just a little window of time at the beginning where you'll want to probably use protection all cycle until you've got the hang of opening and closing your fertile window. Mm-hmm. So I think if somebody really wants to learn FAM and is really keen on kind of going all in, then it'll be the perfect method for them.
Yeah, that's a really great way of explaining it. And yeah, I have learned that myself, I use a barrier method during my fertile window. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty lucky. I have a fairly regular cycle, but I do notice it changing from like being around 28 days to then like 33 when I'm super stressed. Like I notice for me, the biggest impactor for my cycle is stress.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. Yeah.
Like,
yeah, I'm the exact same way. I think some people are really sensitive to stress. Some people, it doesn't matter if like their life is a train wreck. Their cycle will still be super regular. And for other people, it's just like the slight little change or a slight little increase in stress. And it's like everything goes out the window. I'm one of those people too.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a fun time. Yeah.
For sure. And then it's like, oh, I didn't even experience like stress like outside of me. It's all like internal stress that I created myself. And here I am. Look at me again. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah. I can relate to that for sure.
But tell us a little bit about your story when it comes your cycle and your health, and like kind of leading into this whole like how you've also become so passionate now about talking how diet culture has made its way into the women's health, the women's hormonal health space, because there's so much to it. Like when you and me were discussing about what we want to talk about, and you mentioned that this is something you're really passionate about, I was like, yes, this is so. And I've seen it with everything. I've even seen it with menstrual cycle awareness. And I was one of those people when I was first introduced to menstrual cycle awareness. I was like, okay, in my luteal phase, this is what I'm allowed to eat, and this is only what I'm allowed to do exercise wise, and then this is what I am allowed to do during ovulation, and then in my follicular phase, this is what I do. And I was just, oh,
Yeah. 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 I know exactly what you mean. Just like a new set of rules. It's like a new way of kind of controlling your life a little bit. And yeah, I was talking on the Cycle Coach show, the podcast Claire Baker puts out. You're talking about how menstrual cycle awareness is not about prescriptive rituals to do in each phase. It's about really showing up in your life every day and asking yourself, what do I need today, and how can I meet my needs and live in a way that is honoring of myself. And I think we've lost that a little bit in the online space with wellness culture, and I see it a lot with the different foods and the different phases of the cycle. Or, for example, like one of the big trends when I was kind of first in this world was seed cycling, like eating certain seeds during different phases. And it just always is coming back to food. And I feel like it's created this kind of new, like, obsessive way of focusing on the cycle and focusing on hormone healing. And it's almost created like a new diet in a way. And I have always struggled with long cycles ever since I started charting with fertility awareness. And I've found that in the PCOS space, everything comes back to food. And I understand why that is. But when it becomes obsessive and when it becomes guilt-ridden, I feel like it does more harm than good. And I've come across very few people who speak about hormone healing in a way that doesn't perpetuate diet culture. So I started kind of just exploring that and talking about it. And I feel like the biggest way that this shows up is that most recommendations or treatments for any hormone health issue, like painful periods or endometriosis or PCOS, always come back to cutting out certain food groups or even just creating new bad foods that you need to avoid. And food does so well on Instagram. Like, Instagram accounts that share recipes and food do really, really well in the algorithm. And so I feel like it's just this cycle that's kind of snowballed where those things do really well. And then in our own lives, when we're in our kitchens and eating food, we suddenly have this new voice in the back of our heads that's kind of demonizing certain foods. So I have really tried to find a balance, and I think balance is really hard to achieve, but really being mindful of like trying things and seeing if they're actually making a difference. So if someone's listening to this and is struggling with hormonal acne or irregular cycles or painful periods, chances are you've tried a bunch of things. You've probably tried a bunch of supplements. You've probably tried different movement or different foods. Really asking yourself, is this actually making a difference in my symptoms? Like, is this actually creating some improvement, or is it just adding a new stress in my life, a new rule that I need to abide by, and a new guilt that I didn't feel before? I've tried so many things, and very little has made a massive shift other than, like, I would say stress and probably going on metformin, noticing the ways that stress really messes with my cycle and then seeing some more regularity going on metformin. But just doing a little inventory and asking, like, are these things actually making a difference? And if not, then why are we doing them? And there's just this kind of awareness with whatever you take in online that there is a lot of diet culture masked recommendations and approaches.
Yeah, it's so sad to see. And I've even had people reach out to me because I weave MCA into my work still, but I don't necessarily offer it just as a standalone service. But I've had people reach out to me, be like, "Oh, can you teach me about what I should eat during the different phases?" I'm like, "No, that's not what this is about."
Yeah.
And I love that you suggested the whole, like, give it a try, see if it makes a difference, and if not, why is it another rule that you have to add in that is probably causing more stress? And like you and me were saying, like, most people do get affected by stress. Of course, there is those unicorns that, like you said, their life could be a train wreck and still they're functioning.
Totally.
If you're that kind of a unicorn, enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, especially with PCOS, there is this focus on weight and this association with healthy being thin. And I know a lot of people who have really, exercised a lot and reduced what they've eaten and have lost their menstrual cycles. So I think that we really have to be mindful about this, like, fat phobia that exists as well, that it's possible that you can be really thin and unhealthy in quotation marks. And there's
your
a couple of great books that I've read in the last year on this topic. Your menstrual cycle is a fifth vital sign. One of them, by Virginia Soul-Smith, talks about how when you go to the doctor's office, if you are made a recommendation on, some type of change to make for your symptoms, asking, like, if I was thin, would you still make this recommendation? And just really, which really stuck with me. So it's like, really kind of confronting the ways that fat phobia exists in hormone healing spaces and especially PCOS. Just because you're thin does not mean that, you have healthy cycles or healthy hormones too. And I think we see a lot of bodies on Instagram and we see a lot of people, like thin people, eating certain foods on Instagram, and just being mindful of how that can also weasel your way into your brain and the way that you move about the world.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I'm going to remember that one.
Yeah.
Very powerful. Very powerful.
Yeah. And just like, I think it's important to just do a little purge of who you follow online too. I do this every once in a while, but just like asking yourself how people are making you feel. And if you're starting to have this kind of like new rules or guilt around specific foods, is this coming from something that you see online? For me, it's always something that I see online that's making me kind of question what I'm doing. And really doing a little purge of the information and the people that you're learning from, and being really mindful of that too.
Yeah. I love doing those purges too.
Yeah.
Quite often. Because it's coming back to, I always like to teach on like taking radical self-responsibility and like what we consume and things. And if you're choosing to follow someone that makes you feel like crap, you're choosing that because you could unfollow them. So in a way, it's so healthy to do these purges and really ask yourself, is this person supporting me in where I'm going and where I'm moving into, or is it making me feel bad? And That doesn't necessarily mean that the person is bad, because I do believe that everyone's doing the best they can with whatever knowledge they have at that moment. It's just not your person right now.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah. I love that idea of taking self-responsibility and also remembering that, like, I don't think anybody has the truth. You
Yes.
know, I feel like there's been so many trends in the short amount of time that I have taught fertility awareness, from seed cycling to like pro metabolic eating. Just like there's been so many things that have come and gone that I think when we start to not I don't say blindly follow, but when you start to have these people that you look up to online, like I have these people too, it can be really easy to be like, oh, they have the truth, they have the secret sauce, this is going to help me. But I really don't believe that there's one truth. And I think it really comes back to knowing yourself and knowing what's actually helping and what's not, and doing that self-responsibility piece of taking stock of yourself and being your own authority instead of putting so much emphasis on the authority of other people. And it's just gotten very loud in that space. And I'm also coming off like a month and a bit off Instagram, and I feel like that's also been such a great thing for my mental health, is just like, especially after a launch or just like taking in a lot of other people's content, is just to like step back and let your brain kind of reset a little bit. And that's been so helpful for me to just, take a little step back and then recalibrate and then ask myself how I want to show up or who I want to follow when I come back, because you can just kind of see everything a little more clearly. At least that's where I am right now. If you ask me in 2 months, I'll be like so sick of social media again. But yeah, right now it's like, I feel like I'm in a place where I'm like, okay, just being really considerate about how I am online.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love how many people I've had on this podcast that we've had the conversation basically who are like online business owners who have a very much a love-hate relationship with social media.
Yes. Yeah. I was with my cousin's kid, not my nephew, but my cousin's kid, and he's not really on screens very much. And last night we were showing him a reel, and just the way that his body responded to the reel and the way that his body responded to the screens was so noticeable. And you could just tell the way that this fast-paced video is like just not the speed that we normally take in information, and the way his like body moved was just so fascinating to me, because it's just not natural for us. And yet it's kind of like this, for me, it's a necessary thing. So I'm always trying to figure out how to show up in a way that honors my mental health, but it's always good to remember that it's not supernatural for us, and it can be another source of stress.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Creating boundaries around social media is so important. Like I do at least one day a week where I do not touch, like just do not touch it. And then I do generally when I'm on my bleed, take even more time to just go inward. Like that works for me, might not work for everyone, because like you said, there's no one way of doing anything. I'm very much the same believer in that concept of, you have to figure out what works for you, like coming back to that internal authority, like you said, which actually kind of, I guess, could be a good question. Maybe someone who's listening and realizing that they've allowed themselves unconsciously to fall into this trap of diet culture in the women's health space, in the hormone health space, in the fertility awareness, the menstrual cycle space. And now they're like, okay, I want to change that. What would be your advice for someone to kind of navigate coming back into their own inner authority?
I think really the first thing is to ask yourself why you're doing things. If they're trends you've seen online or things that you've read, just doing a little stock of whether they're actually making a difference. That includes like supplements you're taking, like just doing a little inventory of what you're doing for your health, and is it actually making you feel better? And if it is, amazing. If not, reevaluating, is this a new rule that I've kind of imposed on myself? And if it makes you feel guilty, ditch it and see how that feels. I remember when I was on a trip a couple years ago, I had like left all of my supplements at home, and I had kind of gotten out of this routine that I found myself in where I was like making bone broth every week and like
Mm.
doing all of these things that were very like almost rule based or regimented. Like I had to do them. And I started ovulating again when I was on this trip, when I'd like totally just left everything at home. And that always happens to me. Like I'm always cycling again when I go on vacation. And I think it's those little resets or like taking an Instagram break, like just stepping away from things and then seeing what happens, seeing if things improve or stay the same or get worse. I think that's a great information to take in and make decisions from. Um, and then the other piece is just taking stock of the info that you're learning from, especially with PCOS. I think there's a lot of different ways that people have kind of shared education on PCOS online, and is almost always coming back to food. So just taking a look at whether the people you're following are really promoting diet culture and thinness being the healthy standard. And if they are, asking yourself how that feels. And there's lots of people who educate from a space of not doing that. So maybe it's looking for new people to follow. And then I think the best thing, I know I'm quite a like routine based person. And I think like buying myself a treat has become the ultimate way of like challenging this in myself, and really just like haven't been recently online, but we'll just post like, buying myself a treat on my stories, and other people will send me like the treats that they get themselves. And I think there's just something in that where it's like, just like get out of your routine and break some of the rules that you've made for yourself. Like it seems so small, but if you're anything like me and you do create these like internalized shoulds, just challenge those and break out of them and buy yourself a treat or do something out of the ordinary. And see how that feels with you. And you'll start to quickly find, if you have these rules, that there might be something to look at in there. And then remembering that you are your own authority, you know yourself best, and your cycle is, if you're like anything like Kat and I, your cycle will tell you when things are off. And for me, like the number one thing has been stress. It's not what I'm eating, it's not supplements I'm taking, it's being in a space where my nervous system is regulated and I'm able to be in a daily rhythm where my nervous system is regulated. And that's when I find that I cycle regularly. So nervous system regulation and pleasure and sleep and getting outside every day, like all of those things are so important and help you feel calm and relaxed and help your body want to ovulate.
Yeah. Because if you think about like the whole concept, and I know that the polyvagal theory kind of touches on that as well, that when we're in that fight and flight response and everything gets, focused on keeping us alive, digestion and sexual health is not necessarily something that we need in that moment when we're in that stress response.
Exactly. It's like I always tell my clients that ovulation goes to the bottom of the priority list because biologically it's not safe to have a baby. And so, yeah, you might notice that in certain seasons of life, like even in summertime when things are just like so extroverted and external and like there's so much going on, sometimes your body can even perceive that as stress. So, and there's also stress, I think too, with the whole stress conversation. There's also stress that's out of your control. I just want to say that too. Like I've had seasons of my life of like significant grief that is so out of my control, and my cycles were not normal. I didn't feel particularly great, but there's nothing that you can do about that. And I think there is this conversation around like everything is in your control, and if you just like change these things, then everything's going to get better. And I think it really ignores like that stress that you can't do anything about. And I think we all probably have something in our lives that is just there, and that is just part of life. And yeah, so that exists too.
Yeah. It's like the whole toxic positivity space and like the mental health space. Like, yeah, just think
Just do this and just meditate. Yeah, and you'll get your cycle back. It's like, no.
It's not that easy. Like, and there's a space where we really need to actually sit with the grief and the emotions and allow it to be witnessed. Like, that's healing on its own, instead of like forcing your way through, like, oh, I'm just gonna like put a smile on and work my way through this. Like, no, like that. It's
yeah, absolutely.
Oh, the wellness space and its shadows.
That's why I just love the cycle coach community. Is I feel like we all are a little bit nuanced in the way that we see wellness, and I think we all have that in common. I think you can really sense when somebody has nuance and when somebody doesn't. And I think women who have lived rich lives understand nuance and understand this conversation is deeper than just like shiny Instagram posts. And that's just real life.
Yeah. And sometimes we can't do anything about it because we just don't have control over that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I always like to end with one question because I know that you have a busy day of calls ahead of you. For those listening and they're like really intrigued about everything we're talking about, and this is always like such an interesting question because you could go so many directions, but that's, I guess, why I love it as well. What is your one piece of advice for the woman listening and being like super intrigued about this whole conversation that we've had?
Track ovulation. I think tracking your cycle is one thing, but when you can go that step deeper and track ovulation, no matter if you have a short cycle, a long cycle, you're in a season of stress, knowing where you are in relation to ovulation brings so much peace of mind, not just like not worrying that you're pregnant, but just in having that deep connection to your body. And I think your period is something that's so obvious that you can't not pay attention to, but ovulation, unless you're tracking it, will happen right under your nose. So tracking ovulation has been life-changing for me. And knowing when you ovulate is a really powerful way of like deepening your self-awareness and connection to yourself and your cycle.
I love that. And I actually often, I have quite a few clients who are moving into perimenopause and their cycles are shifting. And I actually recommend to them to track their ovulation also to help understand kind of what's happening.
Yeah, it just gives you this like peace of mind and knowledge, even when things are not predictable. And perimenopause, PCOS, postpartum, all of those different times in your life, there's a lot going on. And when you can anchor into your cycle and ovulation beyond just a 14-day or ovulating on day 14 and having a 28-day cycle, because so few of us have that, really tuning into your own unique ovulation, that is a game changer, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that. That's such great advice. How do people find you? What is some ways that people can connect with you these days and maybe even work with you if they're like, oh, I want to learn how to track my ovulation from Nat?
Yeah, you can take my free video course, FAM Fundamentals, that will walk you through how to get started with ovulation tracking and fertility awareness. You can find it on my website, fertilityawarenessproject.ca/fam-fundamentals. I also have a bi-weekly newsletter called the Fertile Flow, where I share a lot of these conversations that we're having today, and you can just scroll to the bottom of my website and sign up for that, fertilityawarenessproject.ca. And then when I'm not on an Instagram break, I'm at Fertility Awareness Project on Instagram, and you can come and say hello over there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I hope that people are going to come and soak up all your goodness. Thank you for your time today.
It was great to chat with you.
Thank you for tuning into the Empower and Evolve podcast. It means so much to me that you've taken time out of your day to tune in. If you're open to it, and if you love the episode, I would love to invite you to take a couple of minutes to rate and review the podcast on either Apple Podcast or Spotify. This will help me reach new audiences and share this message more broadly. And if this episode really struck a chord with you, I would like to invite you to share it on social media and tag me at It's Coach Kat so we can spread the love together. Until next time, I'll catch you there. Bye.